What makes a person courageous? It's a simple question, but the answer isn't simple at all. We often think of courage as something a person just has, like a built-in feature. Some people are brave and some are not. We see soldiers or firefighters and think they were born different, born without fear. But that's not really how it works. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. It's feeling the fear, the shaking hands, the pounding heart, and doing the right thing anyway. And when we look at the story of Queen Esther, we see this in a powerful way. Esther wasn't a soldier, she wasn't a prophet who heard the voice of God from a burning bush. She was a young woman, an orphan, living as a minority in a foreign powerful empire. She was, in many ways, just a normal person thrown into an impossible situation. And yet she became one of the most courageous figures in the entire Bible. Her story isn't about a superhero. It's about how an ordinary person found extraordinary courage. To understand her courage, we have to understand her world. It was a world of absolute power. The Persian king Xerxes was not a democratic leader. His word was law. If he was in a bad mood, you could lose your head. Literally. The story starts with him banishing his first queen, Vashti, simply for refusing to show off her beauty to his drunk friends. That's the kind of man Esther eventually marries. That's the environment she lived in. It was a place where a woman's life, even a queen's life, was fragile. Esther was also hiding a secret. A big one. She was Jewish. Her cousin Mordecai, who raised her like a daughter, told her to keep her identity hidden. In a foreign court, it was safer that way. So, she lived a double life. On the outside, she was Esther, the beautiful Persian queen. On the inside, she was Hadassah, the Jewish orphan. This is important. Her courage didn't come from a place of privilege or power. It came from a place of vulnerability and concealment. The crisis hits like a tidal wave. A wicked man named Haman, the king's top advisor, develops a deep hatred for Mordecai. Mordecai, being a devout Jew, refused to bow down to Haman. This small act of defiance enraged Haman so much that he decided to kill not just Mordecai, but every single Jew in the entire empire. And he was clever about it. He manipulated the king, lied about the Jewish people, and got the king to sign a decree. A legal, irreversible order for a full-blown genocide. This is the backdrop for Esther's courage. The stakes could not be higher. It's not just her own life on the line. It's the life of her family, her friends, her entire people. They were all going to be annihilated on a specific day. And she, the queen, was one of them, hiding in plain sight. This is where her story really begins. It's the moment she is called to be more than just a pretty face in a palace. It's the moment she has to decide who she really is. And the source of her courage is not one single thing. It's a mix of things that build on each other, pushing her from a place of fear to a place of action. It's a process. One of the first things that fueled her courage was her connection to her identity, even though it was hidden. She lived in the palace. She wore the finest clothes. She ate the king's food. If she had a Persian name, it would have been so easy for her to forget where she came from, to just assimilate and enjoy her life of luxury. Many people in her position would have done just that. They would have said, "This isn't my problem. I'm safe here." But she didn't forget. Mordecai was her link to her past. He would sit at the king's gate, a constant, quiet reminder of her people and her heritage. When the decree of death went out, Mordecai didn't just accept it. He mourned publicly. He tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He made a scene. He made sure Esther heard about it. He didn't let her stay comfortable in her royal bubble. He forced her to confront the reality of her identity. She was Esther the queen, yes. But she was also Hadassah the Jew, and Hadassah the Jew was under a death sentence, just like everyone else. Her courage began with the painful realization that she couldn't separate her position from her people. Her safety was an illusion. Her identity was not something she could just put on and take off. It was who she was. And who she was about to be wiped out. This realization that her fate was tied to the fate of her people was a powerful motivator. It moved the problem from an abstract political issue to a deeply personal crisis. It was no longer about them. It was about us. But this realization alone wasn't enough. Fear was still a massive barrier, and her fear was completely rational. She knew the law of the palace. No one, not even the queen, could go to the king in his inner court without being summoned. The penalty for breaking this rule was death. The only exception was if the king held out his golden scepter. And he hadn't called for her in a month. For all she knew, she had fallen out of his favor. Walking in uninvited was a gamble with her life. This is where the second source of her courage comes in. The catalyst. The push she needed from someone who believed in her. That person was Mordecai. When Esther first heard the news, her initial reaction was to send clothes to Mordecai, to try to get him to stop his public mourning. She was trying to manage the situation from a distance, to keep things quiet. But Mordecai refused. He sent a message back to her, a message that changed everything. It's one of the most pivotal conversations in the Bible, and it happened through a messenger. He told her what was happening. He explained the whole plot, the money Haman had promised to pay, the decree to kill all the Jews. And he urged her to go to the king and plead for her people. Esther's response was one of fear. She sent a message back explaining the law. Everyone knows that if I go to the king without being called, I will be put to death. It's been 30 days since he's called for me. She was essentially saying, it's impossible. It's a suicide mission. And then Mordecai sent back his final, powerful reply. This message is the very heart of the story. He didn't coddle her. He didn't say, oh, you're right, it's too dangerous. He challenged her. He gave her 3 things to think about. First, he dismantled her illusion of safety. He said, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. He punctured her royal bubble. He told her straight the palace walls won't save you. Haman's decree doesn't have an exception for queens. When they come for the Jews, they will come for you too. Your position offers you no real security. Second, he introduced the idea of a bigger plan. He said, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. This is a stunning statement. Mordecai had faith. He believed that God would not let his people be destroyed. The plan of salvation would go forward, with or without Esther. But, he warned, if she chose to do nothing, if she chose self-preservation, she would be cut off from that plan. She would miss her chance and be lost. It's a powerful message about consequence and destiny. The choice was hers, but the choice had a cost. And third, he gave her a new way to see her life. He reframed her entire existence with one question. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? That question changed everything. It suggested that her life was not a series of random accidents. Becoming an orphan, being raised by Mordecai, being chosen in a beauty contest, becoming queen. It wasn't just luck, it was purpose, it was providence. Her whole life had been leading to this single moment. Her position wasn't a privilege to be enjoyed, it was a platform to be used. It wasn't for her comfort. It was for this specific, terrible, critical time. That message from Mordecai was the fire that forged her courage. It transformed her perspective from if I go, I might die, to I was put here for this very reason. It shifted her focus from the risk to the purpose. Her courage wasn't just a burst of emotion. It was a conscious choice made after being challenged by someone who saw the potential in her that she couldn't yet see in herself. Sometimes courage is borrowed. It's sparked by the faith someone else has in us. And Mordecai held up a mirror and showed her not just who she was, but who she could be. So now she had the motivation. She had the purpose. But courage also needs a plan. And this is the next piece of what made Esther so remarkable. Her courage was not reckless. It was incredibly wise and strategic. After receiving Mordecai's message, she didn't just storm into the throne room. Her response was measured. The first thing she did was say, go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. This is so important. Before she took a single physical step, she took a spiritual one. Fasting was an act of humility, desperation, and dependence. It was a way of saying, I cannot do this on my own. We need help from a power greater than the king of Persia. Even though the book of Esther never mentions the name of God, this act of fasting is a clear signal that she was relying on him. She was gathering the spiritual support of her entire community. She was uniting her people in prayer and preparation. Her courage was not a solo act. She knew she was part of a community, and she drew strength from that. Then, after the 3 days of fasting, she put her plan into action. And it was a brilliant plan. It was a masterpiece of psychology and timing. She put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court, just where the king could see her from his throne. She was beautiful, and the king was pleased to see her. He held out the golden scepter. The first and most dangerous hurdle was cleared. He said to her, What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given you. This was her moment. She could have blurted it all out right there. Haman is trying to kill us all. But she didn't. That would have been rash. It might have put the king on the defensive. Instead, she showed incredible patience and control. Her request was simple. If it pleases the king, she said, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. This was genius. Why a banquet, and why invite Haman? First, it disarmed the king. He was probably expecting a big political or financial request. A simple dinner party was an easy yes. It made him curious and put him in a good mood. Second, inviting Haman was a masterstroke. It inflated Haman's ego to an unbelievable degree. He was the only person in the entire kingdom invited to a private banquet with the king and queen. He went home boasting about it. It made him feel untouchable. It made him arrogant and careless. At the first banquet, the king was enjoying himself. He asked her again, "What is your petition? It will be granted." Again, this was her chance, but she held back. She was still controlling the timing. She said, "My petition and my request is this. If the king is pleased with me, let the king and Haman come to a second banquet. I will prepare for them tomorrow, and then I will answer the king's question." Why a second banquet? This move was even more brilliant than the first. It built the suspense. The king was now dying to know what she wanted. It also gave events time to unfold. And in that one night between the two banquets, a coincidence happened that changed everything. The king couldn't sleep, so he asked for the Book of the Chronicles, the official records of his reign, to be read to him. And the part that was read just happened to be the story of how Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate the king years earlier. The king asked, "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" His servants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." The very next morning, Haman arrived at the palace early. He had spent the previous evening building a giant gallows 75 feet high to hang Mordecai on. He was coming to ask the king's permission, but before he could speak, the king asked him a question. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman, in his massive ego, thought the king was talking about him. So he described the most lavish public honor he could imagine, putting the man in the king's own robes, on the king's own horse, and having a high official lead him through the city streets, shouting, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." The king loved the idea, and then he dropped the bomb. "Go at once," he commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate." The humiliation for Haman was total. He had to publicly honor the man he was about to execute. This was the direct result of Esther's patient, strategic plan. She created the space for Providence to work. So when the second banquet arrived, the stage was perfectly set. The king was in her debt, curious and friendly. Haman was humiliated, confused, and off balance. This is when Esther finally acted. The king asked her for the third time, "What is your petition, Queen Esther?" And this time she answered. Her courage was now on full display. She didn't just make a political argument. She made it personal. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, and this is my petition, and spare my people, this is my request." She revealed her identity at the most dramatic possible moment. She connected the political decree to her own life. This wasn't an abstract problem anymore. It was his own wife whose life was on the line. The king was shocked. Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? And then Esther delivered the final blow. She pointed directly at her enemy. An adversary and enemy. This vile Haman. The courage in that moment is breathtaking. She was in a room with the two most powerful men in the empire. One was her husband, a man with a famously short temper. The other was her mortal enemy, a man who had the power to crush anyone who got in his way. And she stood before them, spoke her truth, and named her enemy. Her courage wasn't just in the approaching. It was in the speaking. For so long, her voice had been silent about who she was. She had hidden. Now, she was using her voice not just for herself, but for her entire people. She was their representative, their only hope, and she did not shrink from the moment. The rest of the story unfolds quickly. The king was enraged. Haman was terrified. He pleaded for his life with Esther, but it was too late. The king ordered him to be hanged on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. But the story isn't over. The original decree to kill the Jews was still in effect, and according to Persian law, it could not be revoked. So Esther had to be courageous again. She went before the king a second time, this time weeping at his feet, begging him to overturn Haman's evil plan. Because the old law couldn't be changed, the king gave Esther and Mordecai his authority to write a new one. They wrote a new decree that allowed the Jews to assemble and defend themselves on the day they were supposed to be annihilated. They could fight back. This is a key part of the story. Esther's courage didn't just save herself. It empowered her people. She didn't just ask for protection. She secured the means for her people to have agency and to fight for their own lives. Her courage created more courage. When we look at all these pieces together, a picture of real courage emerges. It wasn't a single act, it was a journey. It started with a painful connection to her identity. It was ignited by the challenging words of a mentor. It was shaped by wisdom, patience, and brilliant strategy. It was sustained by a quiet, deep-seated faith shown through her call to fasting. And it was ultimately expressed through a clear, powerful voice at the moment of maximum risk. There is one more layer to her courage, and it's perhaps the most profound. It's the courage to embrace purpose over self-preservation. When she finally decided to go to the king, she told Mordecai, "I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." That line is the essence of her transformation. If I perish, I perish. She accepted the worst case scenario. She let go of the outcome. She stopped trying to control her own survival and instead committed to doing the right thing no matter the cost. This is the heart of true courage. It's not a guarantee of success, it's a surrender of self. She was willing to trade her life for the chance to save her people. Her courage was fundamentally selfless. So, what made Queen Esther so courageous? It was not an innate quality, it was a series of choices. She chose to listen to Mordecai's hard truth. She chose to risk her life. She chose to fast and pray. She chose patience and strategy over panic. She chose to speak truth to power. She chose her people over her own safety. Her story tells us that courage is something we build. It's built on our identity, who we understand ourselves to be. It's built by the people around us who challenge us to be better. It's built through careful thought and preparation, not just blind emotion. And it's built on a foundation of purpose, on the belief that our lives are for something bigger than just our own comfort and survival. Esther was called for such a time as this. Her entire life funneled down to a few critical days where her choices would determine the fate of a nation. And in that moment, she rose to the occasion. Her story endures because it's not just about a queen in a faraway land. It's about the potential that lies within every person who is faced with a choice between fear and purpose. It shows us that courage is not for the special few. It is for anyone willing to say, I was put here for this moment, and if I perish, I perish.